People believe lions are born with pride in their blood. They imagine them as untouchable rulers of the wild, never bowing, never asking, never depending on anything but strength. But on a silent morning across the Makulu plains, that belief began to crumble. The fifth sunrise spilled a pale gold light over the dry grasslands, yet it carried no warmth. The wind moved slowly, whispering through brittle stems like a reminder of a land that once overflowed with life. Beneath the twisted branches of a thorny acacia tree, a lion cub lay unnaturally still. His small body was curled against the cracked earth as if trying to hide from the pain consuming him. The left side of his face was grotesquely swollen. Beneath his eye, the skin stretched tight and glossy, bulging outward in a way that felt wrong, dangerously wrong. Standing beside him was a full-grown male lion. His name was Cairo. Cairo did not pace. He did not roar. He did not mark territory or scan for prey. He simply stood guard. His powerful legs trembled slightly, not from exhaustion, but from something far deeper: helplessness. The cub at his feet was his son, his only one. The cub's name was Lumo. For nearly 5 days, Cairo had not left Lumo's side. No hunting, no resting, no chasing away opportunity, just watching, waiting, hoping that whatever unseen force had taken hold of his son's eye would loosen its grip. But the wild does not work on hope. The swelling had started 2 nights earlier as nothing more than mild irritation. A little redness, a bit of watering. Cubs got scratched all the time. Pain passed. Bodies healed. Except this time it didn't. Cairo noticed something was wrong the morning Lumo stopped playing. The cub had always been curious, chasing insects, swatting at drifting leaves, staring wide-eyed at shadows sliding across the grass. That morning he crouched low instead, squinting into the light, one eye already beginning to close. Then the swelling came fast. Hour by hour it grew, pushing outward from beneath the skin as if something foul were festering inside. By the end of the second day, Lumo could no longer walk straight. He bumped into rocks, stumbled when the wind shifted, collapsed after only a few steps. By the third day he could not stand at all. Cairo remembered nudging him gently that morning, waiting with held breath as Lumo struggled to lift his head. And then came the moment that shattered everything. Lumo looked up at his father and could not see him. The left eye was completely hidden beneath the swelling. The right stared past Cairo, unfocused, empty. The world had slipped beyond reach. A low, broken sound rose from Cairo's chest. It was not a roar. It was something quieter, something heavy. This was not how the wild was supposed to work. Cubs fell, cubs got up, injuries healed with time, but this was invisible, relentless, growing worse with every breath. For 4 days, Cairo did everything he could. He chased hyenas away at night. He lay beside Lumo during the day, his massive body blocking the burning sun. He ignored the scent of prey passing close enough to touch. Nothing mattered except the small, fragile life beneath him. But on the 5th morning, everything changed. Lumo had not moved since the stars faded. He did not whimper. He did not tremble. He only breathed shallow, fragile gasps. The swelling around his eye was so tight it looked ready to burst. Cairo knew, not in words, not in thought, but in the deepest place where instinct and love collide. If he did nothing now, there would be no 6th sunrise for his son. The wild offered no solutions. The other lions had moved on days ago, uninterested in a cub that smelled wrong. Scavengers circled a little closer each night. Even the wind seemed unwilling to carry the scent of something so close to death. Cairo lifted his gaze to the horizon. Far away, something caught the light metal glass movement, and beneath it a low, unnatural sound. Humans. A memory stirred. Long ago, when Cairo was younger, something sharp had lodged in his paw. Strange creatures with gentle hands had removed it. The sting had faded. The pain had stopped. He remembered the sharp smell, the watchful eyes, not hunters, not friends, but something else. Could they help? Cairo looked back down at Lumo. The cub's chest barely rose now. The swollen eye gleamed under the sun, stretched to its limit. For the first time in his life, Cairo made a choice no lion was meant to make. He turned away from his son, not to abandon him, not to hunt, not to flee, but to find the only hope left. Step by step, head low, muscles burning, Cairo walked toward the distant sound of humans. Each step felt wrong, tearing against every instinct he had ever known. Behind him, beneath the acacia tree, a cub lay dying. Ahead of him, somewhere across the plains, the faint rumble of an engine echoed through the silence. Hope is fragile in the wild, but sometimes even here it dares to grow. Once the world had been endless to Lumo. Every sound meant something. Every movement mattered. The sway of grass, the flicker of insects, the shadow of birds drifting across the sun. Nothing escaped his notice. Now the world had narrowed to pain. The swelling around Lumo's left eye had grown overnight. The skin was stretched thin, shiny and fragile, pulsing with each shallow heartbeat. The eye itself was sealed shut, buried beneath pressure that pressed outward and inward at the same time, stealing space, stealing breath, stealing strength. When Lumo tried to lift his head, a sharp tremor ran through his small body. A faint, broken sound escaped his throat so soft it barely carried beyond his chest. But Cairo heard it. He heard everything. The lion lowered himself carefully beside his son, his massive body moving with unnatural gentleness. He pressed his nose against Lumo's neck, breathing in the familiar scent that told him his cub was still alive, for now. But the smell was changing. There was a sharpness beneath it, something sour and wrong, something that did not belong to the open plains. Cairo licked Lumo's face slowly, deliberately, the way he had done since the day his son was born. The moment his tongue brushed the swollen area, Lumo flinched violently. Pain exploded through the cub's body. He jerked legs, kicking weakly, a strained cry tearing from his chest. Cairo pulled back at once, startled, his ears flattening as a low rumble rose in his throat. He had faced rival males, stampeding herds, danger that could be seen, smelled, fought. But this was an enemy without form. Lumo tried to stand. His front paws dug into the dry soil, claws scraping his small muscles, straining with everything he had left. For a brief moment it seemed like he might succeed. Then his legs buckled. The cub collapsed onto his side, breath coming fast and uneven. Dust clung to his fur. His one good eye stared ahead, unfocused, as though the world had slipped just beyond his reach. Cairo stood over him, frozen between instinct and fear. In the wild, weakness was unforgiving. A cub that could not walk would not last long. That truth had been carved into him since birth. And yet every fiber of his being rejected it. He nudged Lumo again, softer this time, urging him to rest, to save the little energy he had left. The swelling had begun to pull the cub's head to one side now. His balance was gone. The pressure behind that eye was relentless, stealing not just sight, but direction, coordination, control. Each breath came slower than the last. Cairo remembered other cubs he had seen over the years, scratched, bruised, limping after rough play. Time had healed them all. This did not heal. This grew stronger. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became brutal. The ground radiated warmth like fire beneath their bodies. Cairo shifted his position again and again until his shadow fully covered Lumo, blocking the worst of the sun. He had not eaten in days. Hunger no longer mattered. Survival had narrowed to one fragile life beneath him. The pain in Lumo's eye was no longer just pain. It was confusion, fear, the terror of not understanding why his body would not respond when he told it to move. When Cairo shifted even slightly, Lumo tried to follow him with his gaze, but his head lagged behind movements, delayed and uncertain. The cub no longer trusted his own senses. Something heavy settled inside Cairo. This was not an injury that rest could fix. This was not something time would heal. Whatever was growing inside Lumo's eye was advancing, deep, aggressive, unstoppable. Left alone, it would take everything. The wild had no answers for this kind of sickness. No remedies hidden in grass, no instinct to fight infection, no way to release the poison building where bone met flesh. Cairo could protect his son from predators, from cold, from hunger. But not from this. By afternoon, Lumo's breathing had become shallow and uneven. His chest barely rose beneath his ribs. Cairo lowered himself again, pressing his side gently against the cub's body, sharing warmth, sharing presence. It was the only comfort he could offer. Somewhere beyond the plains, past the acacia trees, past the dry riverbeds, humans lived with knowledge Cairo did not possess. Tools, medicine, interventions that belonged to another world. He did not understand them, but he understood this. If nothing changed, Lumo would not survive another day. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the savannah. Light caught the swollen eye, making it glisten unnaturally. Cairo looked at it, then looked away as if refusing to accept what it meant. For the first time since his son was born, the ground beneath Cairo's certainty began to shift. Instinct was no longer enough, and as the evening stretched toward night, something inside him began to prepare for a choice, one that would break every rule he had ever lived by. The beginning had been so small that no one, not even a watchful father, could have stopped it. Days earlier, when Lumo was still strong enough to chase shadows and stumble after drifting leaves, the Makulu Plains had been restless. A sudden gust of wind swept across the grasslands, lifting fine sand into the air. It stung eyes and noses, coated fur, and vanished just as quickly as it came. Lumo had shaken his head and pawed at his face, annoyed more than hurt. A single grain of sand had scraped the delicate surface of his left eye. It should have healed. In the wild, it almost always did. But the savannah carried more than dust. Invisible to Cairo, bacteria clung to the sand, thriving in heat and dryness. The tiny scratch became a doorway. By nightfall, infection had begun to spread beneath the surface, deep where the body could not fight it alone. At first, Lumo only blinked more often. He squinted when the sun was bright. Cairo noticed, but nothing about it seemed urgent. Cubs were resilient. Pain passed, strength returned. That was the rhythm of life here. This time it didn't. As the infection grew, pressure built slowly behind the eye. Tissue swelled. Blood flow tightened. Each hour added more pain, more confusion, more weakness. There were no warning signs loud enough to break instinct. By the second night, Lumo stopped playing entirely. He lay in the grass, lifting his head only to watch the world instead of running through it. His movements became cautious, unsure, as though the ground itself had shifted beneath him. By the third day, balance abandoned him. Cairo watched his son walk in uneven circles, stumble, then collapse. Lumo tried to stand again, frightened now, confused by a body that no longer obeyed him. Still, there was nothing Cairo could do. The wild offered no medicine, no relief, no way to drain the pressure building where eye met skull. By the fourth day, the damage was undeniable. The swollen eye was no longer just inflamed. The skin around it stretched tight and glossy, faintly warm to the touch. Heat radiated from the area, carrying a sharp, sour scent. Cairo could smell it now. The scent told him what instinct could not explain. This sickness was alive, and it was winning. For the first time since dawn, Cairo began to pace. His steps were slow, uncertain, tracing uneven circles around his son. He lay down, stood again, pressed his head to the ground beside Lumo, listening to the fragile rhythm of his breathing. In the distance, vultures gathered on a dead tree. They watched patiently. They always did. A low growl rose in Cairo's chest. He surged forward, chasing them away in a burst of anger that surprised even himself. The birds scattered into the sky, dark shapes against the fading light. But when Cairo returned, Lumo had not moved. The effort had drained what little strength remained in Cairo. He stood over his son, chest heaving, and the truth settled heavier than before. Protection was no longer enough. The wild was built to test strength, not to treat sickness. It rewarded speed and power, not endurance through pain. What Lumo needed now was not another night of guarding, not another day of shade and warmth. He needed intervention, something beyond teeth and claws. Somewhere far away, humans carried knowledge the wild did not. Cairo remembered the sharp scent from long ago, the sting that faded after a wound was cleaned. He remembered hands that removed pain rather than caused it. At the time, he had fled the moment he could stand. Trust had never been part of the exchange. Now trust was all that remained. Cairo returned to Lumo's side and lay down fully, his massive body curved protectively around the cub. Lumo stirred faintly, leaning into the warmth, unaware of how close he was to slipping away. Cairo closed his eyes for a moment, memorizing the feel of his son's breathing, the weight of his body, the sound. This was not surrender. It was understanding. Left untreated, the sickness would spread deeper. It would reach places even strength could not protect. Cairo did not know words like abscess or infection or pressure, but he understood the meaning all the same. If Lumo was going to live, the answer would not come from the grass beneath them. As the sun sank lower and the light softened, Cairo lifted his head and looked once more toward the distant horizon, toward the paths where humans crossed the land. He did not know what waited there, but hope, fragile as it was, did not exist anywhere else. Night fell slowly over the Makulu plains. The sun slipped beneath the horizon without urgency, as if unaware that a life was unraveling beneath the acacia tree. Darkness spread across the grasslands, cool and indifferent, carrying with it the distant sounds of the wild settling into motion. For Cairo night brought no rest. He had not truly slept for 4 full nights, not the kind of sleep that heals muscle or quiets the mind. His eyes remained half open, ears twitching at every rustle, every wing beat, every whisper of movement in the grass. Beside him, Lumo barely stirred. The cub's breathing was shallow now, uneven, as though each breath required careful thought. Cairo counted them instinctively, one rise of the chest after another, holding them in his mind like they could be protected by attention alone. They could not. During the second night, the hyenas came. Their laughter rolled across the plains, sharp and cruel, slicing through the darkness. Cairo rose instantly, mane bristling, and unleashed a roar so deep it seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. The scavengers scattered, but Cairo knew better than to feel relief. They always returned when weakness lingered. The third night brought something worse than hyenas: silence. No wind, no distant hooves, no calls from the darkness, only stillness, the kind that made the world feel like it was holding its breath. Cairo curled tighter around Lumo, his massive body forming a wall of muscle and warmth. The heat radiating from the infected eye was stronger now, unmistakable even through fur. The skin had darkened, the swelling reaching toward the cub's temple. The pressure looked unbearable, and still Lumo did not cry. Pain had stolen even that. The wild had taught Cairo one rule above all others: the sick did not survive. Mercy did not exist here. Strength was rewarded. Weakness was erased. Yet watching his son lie motionless, helpless, something inside Cairo rebelled against that truth. What good was strength if it could not protect? Near the middle of the night, a sound broke the silence. It came from Lumo, a soft, breathy whimper so small it might have been mistaken for wind. But Cairo heard it, and it pierced him deeper than any wound. It was not just pain in that sound. It was confusion, fear, a plea from a cub who no longer understood what was happening to his own body. Cairo stood abruptly, agitation rippling through him. He scanned the darkness again and again, the tree line, the hills, the stars overhead. Nothing changed. This land offered no help, no medicine, no intervention, only waiting. Lumo coughed weakly, his body twitching without control. Cairo rushed back to his side and nudged him gently, then more firmly. No response. The breathing continued, but barely. The swollen eye had begun to leak. A thin trail of yellow fluid seeped from the corner and ran into the fur along Lumo's cheek. The sickness was finding a way out, but not fast enough. Cairo lowered his head and pressed his forehead gently against his son's. He stayed there motionless for a long time. He was losing him, and there was nothing left to try. Then far away, almost lost beneath the weight of despair, a sound reached his ears. Not a growl, not wings, not hooves, a low, rolling vibration. Metallic, unnatural. Cairo lifted his head. It came again. Engines. He had heard that sound once before, many seasons ago. A vehicle had moved too fast for him to escape. There had been a sharp sting. darkness, then strange hands, strong smells, and when he woke the pain in his leg was gone. He had fled the moment he could stand. But tonight was different. Tonight his son was dying. Cairo turned toward the sound. Behind him Lumo lay small and fading in the darkness. Ahead of him the night stretched long and uncertain. For the first time a direction formed. At first light he would walk, not for territory, not for hunger, not for survival. He would walk for his son. Cairo lay back down beside Lumo one last time. He memorized the feel of the cub's body, the fragile rhythm of breath, the warmth that might soon disappear. When dawn came, everything would change. Dawn had not yet broken when Cairo rose to his feet. The sky was still a deep indigo, the stars fading slowly in the east. A cold hush lay over the Makulu plains, the kind of silence that exists only in the final moments before morning. For a long time Cairo stood perfectly still. At his feet, Lumo lay curled against the earth. He had not moved through the night. His breathing was shallow and irregular, barely lifting his small chest. The fur along his face was matted where fluid from the infected eye had dried, and the swelling had grown so large that it distorted the shape of his head. Something in Cairo's chest tightened. This was not weakness, this was finality. The wild had nothing left to offer. Cairo lowered his head and pressed his nose gently against Lumo's ear. The touch was light, almost hesitant, as if he were afraid of causing more pain. Nothing. He nudged again, just a little firmer. Lumo stirred faintly, just a flick of his tail, a soft sigh drawn from deep within. It was enough. Cairo closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. His son was still here, but not for long. That was when the sound returned. Faint at first, barely more than a vibration carried on the cool air, then clearer. A low, steady hum rolling across the plains. Engines! Humans were awake. They were close enough to reach. The decision came suddenly, without hesitation, like a line crossed that could never be uncrossed. Cairo turned away from his son. Every instinct in his body screamed against it. No lion left a cub. No father walked away. His muscles burned as if torn, each step heavy with resistance. This was wrong, and yet he kept walking. Cairo moved quickly but carefully, head low, ears swiveling, scanning for danger. He did not look back. He could not. If he did, he would stop, and stopping would mean death for Lumo. The ground was hard beneath his paws, cracked and cold. By mid-morning the sun began its relentless climb. Heat shimmered above the grass, turning the air sharp and dry. Cairo's tongue hung from his mouth as he panted, exhaustion finally making itself known. 5 days without food, no rest, no sleep. Still he did not slow. The scent reached him first. Rubber, fuel, metal, human things. The smell pulled another memory from deep within him, a territorial fight long ago, a torn leg, blood, the roar of engines closing in, a sharp sting, darkness, then waking without pain. He had run from it then. Now he was running toward it. Just before noon, Cairo crested a low rise. Below him the land opened into a wide stretch of dirt road. 2 vehicles crawled across it, one white, one tan, moving slowly, raising thin trails of dust behind them. Cairo stopped. He was fully exposed here. His heart pounded not from exertion, but from something dangerously close to fear. He had never approached humans willingly. Never like this. The vehicles did not slow at first. They continued forward, unaware. Cairo stepped down from the rise. His body was tall, deliberate, unmistakable. He made no attempt to hide. The vehicles braked abruptly. Engines idled. Doors opened. Human figures emerged, small compared to him, wrapped in fabric hats shielding their faces. One raised binoculars, another stepped back. A voice called out sharp with confusion. Cairo took several steps forward. Then he did something no wild lion had ever done. He turned, walked a few steps away, then stopped and looked back. Walk, turn, look, wait. He repeated the pattern again and again. The humans froze, watching him, struggling to understand what they were seeing. This was not threat behavior. This was not curiosity. This was intention. One human stepped forward cautiously. Then another. Cairo glanced once toward the horizon, the direction of Lumo, and let out a roar. Not a challenge, not a warning. A call. The humans moved. Slowly, carefully. Cairo turned and began to walk, his pace steady now, glancing back every few strides to be sure they followed. He had done it. He had broken every rule the wild had taught him. Behind him, a cub lay dying beneath an acacia tree. Ahead of him, strangers walked into the unknown. And for the first time since the sickness began, hope took a fragile step forward. At first no one spoke. The humans stood frozen beside their vehicles, eyes locked on the lion now walking away from them with slow, deliberate steps. Dust drifted in the air. Engines idled softly, as if even the machines sensed something unusual was unfolding. Then the lion stopped. He turned his head and looked back. He waited. "That's not normal," someone whispered. The woman at the front of the group lowered her binoculars. Her name was Dr. Hannah Mercer, a senior wildlife conservation officer who had spent more than 30 years working across African reserves. She had tracked lions through droughts, studied their pride dynamics, and responded to countless emergencies involving injured wildlife. But she had never seen anything like this. "He's not posturing," Hannah said quietly. "And he's not fleeing." The lion took several more steps forward, then turned again, looked back, waited. "He's leading us," said Daniel Cross, the field veterinarian standing beside her. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed disbelief. "I don't know why, but he wants us to follow." For a moment, instinct battled reason. Approaching a wild male lion on foot went against every safety protocol written in their manuals. But this was different. Hannah took a slow breath. "We keep our distance," she said. "No sudden movements, no weapons raised unless absolutely necessary." She took the first step forward. The lion began walking again. The pattern repeated 10 steps. Pause, glance back. Always checking, always waiting. Not once did he show aggression. Not once did his tail flick in irritation or his ears flatten in warning. This was not dominance. It was urgency. They left their vehicles behind at the edge of the dirt road and continued on foot. The sun climbed higher, heat pressing down on their shoulders. The only sounds were boots crunching against dry grass and the steady rhythm of the lion's paws ahead of them. Minutes stretched into hours. The land rolled gently beneath their feet. An abandoned riverbed, a shallow rise, stretches of open savanna, where the horizon felt endless. The lion did not slow. He did not seek shade. He did not stop to drink. He was driven by something stronger than exhaustion. Hope. Hannah studied him as they walked. His body was lean, his movements controlled, but she could see the toll the past days had taken. His breathing was heavy, his pace determined but strained. This lion hadn't eaten in days. "He's leading us somewhere important," Daniel murmured. "Whatever's waiting at the end, it's bad." Hannah didn't answer. She already sensed it. The smell reached her first. Faint but unmistakable. Infection. A sharp, sour note carried on the warm air, subtle but present to a trained nose. Hannah's jaw tightened. She scanned the sky and saw dark shapes circling in the distance. Vultures! Low, patient, waiting. Her pace quickened. She reached for the radio, clipped to her shoulder. "Base, this is Mercer," she said quietly. "Prepare for possible emergency wildlife intervention. We may have a cub in critical condition." Static crackled before a response came through. "Copy that. Stand by." Ahead of them, the lion began to move faster. The ground sloped downward now toward a cluster of sparse trees. The air felt heavier, thicker, as though the land itself was bracing for what lay beneath. Then the lion stopped, not to wait, to signal arrival. He turned once more, met Hannah's eyes briefly, then stepped aside and disappeared into the brush. The team followed carefully. And there, beneath the shade of a thorny acacia tree, lay a small, motionless form. At first glance it looked like sleep. Then Hannah saw the swelling. "Oh no," she whispered. The cub's left eye was grotesquely enlarged, the surrounding tissue inflamed and discolored. His chest rose and fell unevenly, a thin trail of yellow fluid traced down his cheek. Daniel dropped to his knees, immediately opening his medical kit. "This is advanced orbital swelling," he said urgently. "Likely an abscess, possibly septic." Hannah turned. The lion stood only a few yards away, muscles tense, eyes locked on every movement they made. She slowly extended her hands, palms open. "It's okay," she said softly. "We're here to help." The lion did not move, but he did not run. Time seemed to slow. This was no longer just a rescue. It was a trust no one had ever been given before. There are moments in the wild when time no longer behaves as it should. It stretches, it tightens, it holds its breath. As Dr. Hannah Mercer knelt beside the cub, the world seemed suspended between heartbeats. Lumo was barely conscious. His small chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven motions. The swelling around his left eye was worse up close, far worse than it had looked from a distance. The skin was taut and discolored, heat radiating from beneath it. Infection had been building here for days, trapped, aggressive, dangerous. Daniel was already working. His movements were calm, precise, honed by years of field emergencies. "We don't have time," he said quietly. "Pressure's extreme. If we don't relieve it now, it could spread deeper." Behind them, Cairo stood still, not 10 meters away. The lion's massive frame was rigid, muscles tight beneath his dusty coat. His tail was low, his ears forward. His eyes never left his son, not for a second. Every instinct in his body was telling him to intervene, to stop these strangers from touching what was his. And yet he didn't move. Hannah glanced back, once slowly lifting one hand in a gentle, open gesture. "We're not hurting him," she said softly, her voice steady. "We're giving him a chance." Cairo's gaze locked onto hers. For a brief, impossible moment, predator and human held eye contact. There was no threat in his eyes, no challenge. Only vigilance, only fear, only a father's desperate attention. Daniel prepared the local anesthetic while another team member carefully stabilized Lumo's head. The cub twitched weakly as the needle went in, but he did not cry out. He barely had the strength. "Stay with us, little one," Hannah murmured as she gently cleaned the fur around the swelling. "Just a little longer." The medication took effect quickly. Daniel nodded once. "Now." He made a small, precise incision. The response was immediate. A thick stream of cloudy fluid burst from beneath the skin, releasing the pressure that had been crushing the tissue behind the eye. The smell was sharp and unmistakable, deep infection that had been trapped too long. Lumo's body jerked once. A weak sound escaped his throat, not a cry, but something close, something alive. Cairo stepped forward. Hannah's heart skipped. She raised her hand instinctively. "Easy," she said, never raising her voice. "It's okay." Cairo froze. His eyes flicked from the human's hands to his son's face. The swelling was already beginning to soften just slightly. The terrible tension was easing. Slowly, carefully, Cairo sat down. Not relaxed, not trusting, but allowing. Daniel continued, flushing the wound gently with sterile saline, clearing away infection, reducing heat and pressure. Antibiotic treatment followed, then a soft, breathable dressing to protect the area. Throughout it all, Cairo did not look away. When Lumo's breathing began to steady, Hannah placed 2 fingers gently against the cub's chest. The heartbeat was still weak, but it was stronger than before. She let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "We've stabilized him," she said quietly. "This may have saved his life." As if sensing the shift, Cairo rose and took one cautious step closer. He did not cross the boundary the team had set. He simply lowered his head, eyes fixed on Lumo. Then, with a deliberate slowness, he lay down beside his son. Their bodies did not touch, but the space between them felt sacred. Relief settled over the clearing, not loud, not dramatic, but real. This was no longer just an emergency procedure. It was a moment no one there would ever forget. Morning returned gently to the Makulu plains. The sun rose without urgency, spilling soft gold across the dry earth. The wind, once harsh and cutting, moved quietly now, carrying only the scent of dust and acacia blossoms. It felt like the land itself had exhaled. Beneath the thorny acacia tree, the cub stirred. Lumo did not wake all at once. His movements were small at first. A twitch of his whiskers, a slow stretch of one paw, a faint shift of his ribs as breathing deepened. But each motion carried meaning. He was still here. The swelling around his left eye had reduced overnight. Not gone, not healed, but no longer threatening. The bandage remained clean and secure, holding the fragile area steady. Where there had once been unbearable pressure, there was now space. Space to breathe, space to live. Cairo was already awake. Of course he was. The lion lay in a half-circle around his son, his body forming a quiet barrier against the world. His eyes followed every twitch, every breath. He had not slept, not truly, but the sharp edge of tension had softened. Nearby, at a respectful distance, Dr. Hannah Mercer watched through binoculars from beside the mobile field unit. The engine was off. No radios crackled. No one spoke above a whisper. "He's stable," Daniel Cross said softly. "Drainage is working. Antibiotics are holding." Hannah nodded her gaze, never leaving the pair beneath the tree. "And the father?" Daniel smiled faintly. "He hasn't moved more than a meter all night." As if on cue, Lumo opened his right eye. "Just one." The blink was slow and uncertain, but it happened. Light returned, carefully, cautiously. The cub shifted his head slightly, then stilled again, as if surprised by his own movement. Cairo responded instantly. He stood, stepped closer, and pressed his nose gently into Lumo's side. The cub leaned into the contact, a soft sound escaping his chest, something between a sigh and a purr. For the first time in nearly 6 days, Cairo lowered himself fully to the ground. Not alert, not guarding, resting. The lion's eyes remained open, but the tension in his shoulders eased. The crisis that had driven him beyond instinct had finally loosened its grip. High above the ridge, a small conservation media team arrived quietly, cameras trained but unobtrusive. They captured the moment from afar, the cub sitting awkwardly beside his father alive because of a decision no wild animal was meant to make. This story would later appear in documentaries, research discussions, and conversations about animal cognition and emotional intelligence, but here in this moment there were no headlines. Only breath, only warmth, only life. The medical team left supplies secured beneath the tree: antibiotics, sterile water protective dressings. They would return daily, observing from a distance, intervening only if necessary. Relocation was not an option. Cairo would not allow it, and they respected that. Before leaving, Hannah stepped forward alone, stopping well outside Cairo's reach. She placed one hand over her heart, not as a signal, not as a command, but as acknowledgement. Cairo lifted his head and met her gaze. Not as a threat, not as a beast, but as a father. Then he looked back down at Lumo. The plains fell silent once more as the vehicles rolled away, leaving behind nothing but tire tracks, and a story that would echo far beyond the savannah. Recovery did not come all at once. It arrived slowly in fragile pieces measured not in hours, but in small, hard-won moments. The Makulu Plains returned to their usual rhythm, indifferent and vast, yet something beneath its surface had shifted. On the second day after the intervention, Lumo managed to sit up on his own. The movement was awkward. His legs trembled and his balance was uncertain, but he stayed upright long enough to remind everyone watching from afar that life had not given up on him. Cairo was there for every second of it. When Lumo wobbled, Cairo stepped closer without touching him, creating a quiet wall of reassurance. When the cub rested, the lion lay beside him, his body angled protectively, his attention unwavering. The swelling continued to recede. Each morning, the medical team returned at a distance, checking drainage and monitoring signs of infection through binoculars and remote instruments. The bandage remained clean. No new discharge appeared. The antibiotics were working. "The infection's retreating," Daniel said on the third day. "If it stays like this, he may keep full vision in the right eye and partial in the left." Hannah nodded slowly. She had learned not to celebrate too early in the wild, but hope once planted was difficult to uproot. By the fourth day, Lumo took his first steps. They were short and uneven, more shuffles than strides, but they were steps all the same. He moved toward Cairo, instinctively guided not by confidence but by trust. Cairo lowered his head, touching noses with his son, a gesture so gentle it barely disturbed the air. From the ridge, the team watched in silence. No one reached for a camera. Some moments didn't need to be recorded. That evening, Hannah sat alone beside the parked vehicle, staring out across the plains. In all her years of work, she had cataloged behaviors, patterns, survival strategies. But nothing in her training had prepared her for what she had witnessed. A wild male lion had chosen cooperation over instinct, trust over fear, love over law. "I keep thinking about the decision he made," Daniel said quietly, joining her. "Leaving the cub behind to find help. That's not something we're supposed to see." Hannah nodded. "We tell ourselves animals are ruled by instinct because it makes the world easier to explain." She paused. But sometimes instinct isn't enough. As the days passed, Lumo grew stronger. The bandage was eventually removed, revealing healing skin beneath. The left eye remained sensitive, partially swollen, but no longer dangerous. Vision would return slowly, if at all, but life had already won the greater battle. Cairo resumed short patrols around the area, never straying far. Each time he returned, Lumo was waiting, smaller steps now turning into clumsy trots. The vultures disappeared. The scavengers moved on. Weakness no longer lingered here. By the 7th day, the team prepared to withdraw completely. Their work was done. Intervention had given way to observation, and observation to trust. Before leaving for the final time, Hannah stood on the ridge and looked back one last time. Below her, Lumo tumbled awkwardly through the grass, swatting at leaves, testing his strength. Cairo watched from a short distance, alert but calm. Life had returned, not untouched but intact. And in that quiet success, something else had changed too. Every person who witnessed it would carry the memory forward, reshaping how they understood the wild, not as a place without compassion, but as a world where it sometimes appears in the most unexpected forms. The Makulu Plains eventually returned to silence. Not the heavy silence of waiting or the sharp stillness of danger, but the familiar quiet of a land moving forward. Grass bent with the wind, insects resumed their endless work. Life continued as it always did. But not unchanged. Lumo's recovery did not erase what had happened. It reshaped it. Weeks later, the cub moved with confidence again. His steps were still a little uneven at times, his left eye slower to react than the right. But he ran. He played. He chased the world the way cubs were meant to. The sickness that had nearly taken him faded into memory, leaving behind scars that no longer threatened his future. Cairo remained close, not hovering, not guarding out of fear, but present. He watched as Lumo explored farther each day, allowing distance but never indifference. The bond between them had deepened not through strength but through vulnerability, through a moment when instinct alone had not been enough. The humans never returned. They didn't need to. Their role in the story had ended the moment life took over again. The tracks from their vehicles disappeared with the next rain. Their equipment was gone. Their voices faded into memory. But what they carried with them remained. Dr. Hannah Mercer would later speak about the experience to students, conservation teams, and young veterinarians. She never exaggerated, never dramatized. She didn't need to. A wild animal asked for help, she would say, and we listened. Some questioned it. Some tried to explain it away as coincidence or misinterpretation. But those who were there knew better. They had seen intention. They had seen trust. They had seen a father choose a path no rule of the wild had written for him, and that truth stayed with them. The story spread quietly, not as a spectacle, but as a reminder, appearing in conservation discussions, behavioral research, and late-night conversations between people who had dedicated their lives to understanding animals. It challenged something fundamental, that love belongs only to humans, that intelligence is separate from emotion, that the wild is cruel because it must be. Cairo disproved all of it without making a sound. He did not understand medicine. He did not know the word rescue. He did not act for recognition. He acted because his son was dying and because somewhere deep inside he understood that strength sometimes means asking for help. And that is where the real lesson lives.